A drop of fresh, thick blood fell from the tip of the leather boot, touched the dry wooden floor, and was instantly swallowed by the dust. That blood didn't belong to the man pointing the deadly, double-barreled shotgun. It belonged to the man perched in the armchair in the corner of the room, leisurely striking a match to light his half-smoked cigar. A cruel paradox loomed in this room. The man with the gun pointed at his chest grinned maliciously, showing no sign of panic. The one holding the power of life and death, the one with his finger on the trigger, was sweating profusely, his sinewy hands trembling. Your hands still tremble just as they did when you were 10, Luke. The man exhaled a cloud of gray smoke, spitting a mixture of saliva and dark red blood onto the floor. Shoot your own brother, or obediently go outside and dig a hole to hide the corpse I just brought. 8 years. For 8 long years, Luke endured the relentless sandstorms to build this stable. He cast aside his sinful surname, clinging to an anonymous life, solely to protect this home and the woman sleeping upstairs. But now, everything he had strived to preserve was being pushed to the brink of disaster. The brutal man, his own flesh and blood, had returned, carrying an unidentified corpse dangling from a horse. One gunshot would shatter Luke's facade of peace. Bess, the woman with calloused hands who had stood by him through every storm, would be drawn into a whirlwind of murder, hatred, and the noose of the gallows. The imposing man, who had once seemed like a solid wall protecting the stable in the wilderness, was now crumbling from within. He was desperately searching for a way out, but the one pushing him to his death was his own flesh and blood. In the moment when the scythe of death hung over the honor and lives of everyone in this house, another sound rang out, coldly, cutting through the stormy wind. A knock on the door. 3 rapid knocks, firm and decisive. Not a passerby. Whoever was standing on the wooden porch, they had come for the body, or for the cruel smell of blood that had just seeped onto the floor. Luke's gun barrel lowered slightly in despair, and the trail of blood at his feet hadn't yet dried. There's a peculiar kind of poverty on the frontier, one that has nothing to do with how many acres of land you own or how much silver you hide under your floorboards. It's the poverty of someone who, looking into their hands, sees only the filthy sins of their bloodline. That person counts the graves their father dug, the lives their brother took, and concludes that the blood flowing in their veins is nothing but filth. Luke is that wretched man. For 8 years, he's been on the run to this deserted Nevada stable, struggling to bury his past and appear as an honest man. And here he has Bess. She owns half the shares of this dilapidated stable, yet holds the sole reason for him to wake up each day. Their love has never been spoken aloud. It's nurtured through the labored gasps of pulling a young horse out of the mud together. It was evident in the way the horse grooming comb was passed from hand to hand in the dark, silent stable without a glance or guidance. Luke longed for her, but he chose silence. He considered it an act of protection. He believed that a woman as scarred as Bess deserved a peaceful home, not someone bearing the death sentence of her family. He had calculated everything meticulously, accepting the role of a supportive partner just to keep her life from being tainted. But his cowardly plan had just been torn apart. Returning to reality, the 3 sharp knocks on the porch ceased, and Luke's breath hitched. He slowly lowered his hunting rifle, his hands numb. From the shadows on the wooden staircase, the floorboards creaked. Bess was descending. The storm lamp's light illuminated her angular, pale face. She didn't look at the gun Luke held menacingly in his hand. Her gaze was fixed on Pike, then lowered to the dark, red, thick blood still dripping onto the floor. The beast of the past that Luke had spent his life burying had now brazenly crawled across the threshold, placing a death sentence at the feet of the woman he loved. Luke dragged his brother into the damp storage room behind the stable, where the smell of fresh blood mingled with the musty and dry straw. In the dim light of the storm lamp, Pike calmly pulled a rough leather pouch from his soaking wet cloak and tossed it down with a thud onto the wooden crate. Gold. Blood-stained, pure gold. But what tightened Luke's chest wasn't the stolen metal bars. It was a tiny tin hairpin caught on the edge of a leather pouch, stained a cruel dark red. A child's hairpin. The truth struck Luke like a hammer pulling a nail. His older brother hadn't just robbed a bank. He'd massacred an innocent family on the shipping route to steal their goods. And the corpse dangling from the saddle outside was a deputy sheriff. Blood ties are the only thing in the world you can't deny, little brother. Pike grinned, his yellowed teeth gleaming in the shadows. He felt no remorse. He was using that filthy bloodline to tighten the noose around Luke's neck. Luke's conscience screamed at him to raise his rifle butt and smash the killer's skull. But deep-seated fear, that cowardly desire to preserve a false sense of peace in this home, held his hands down. He frantically grabbed the tattered bandage, deceiving himself into thinking that all he needed to do was patch up the beast's wounds and send it back into the darkness, and all its crimes would be buried by the sandstorm outside. But karma never goes away so easily. A sudden flash of crimson light swept through the cracked window of the storage room. A flash, a sharp, piercing glare. Outside, the station yard echoed with the jarring sound of horses' hooves pounding on the sand. A multitude of torches blazed, illuminating a corner of the sky, casting shadows of grim bounty hunters and the six-pointed star badge of the sheriff, radiating a murderous aura. The beast wasn't carrying just a corpse. It had brought a pack of bloodthirsty hounds to the doorstep of the woman he loved most. The central dining room of the horse station was now thick with the stench of sour sweat, torch smoke, and suspicion. The sheriff flung open the wooden door, bringing with him the bone-chilling cold of the desert night. The six-pointed star badge gleamed menacingly in the flickering oil lamp. He tapped his calloused fingers on the table, casting a razor-sharp glance at Luke, questioning him about the bloodthirsty killer who had just murdered his deputy. At that moment, Luke stood at a fateful crossroads, and the man who had spent 8 long years toiling to build a respectable name for himself in this remote frontier chose to swallow hard and bury his conscience. "I didn't see anyone pass by." The words slipped from his lips, cold, cowardly, and deceitful. He had betrayed his own honor, betrayed the integrity of this household to conceal the beast lurking in the shadows. But the heaviest sentence, the deepest cut, didn't come from the law. It came from the quiet, dark corner behind the kitchen counter. Bess stood there, half her face hidden in the shadows. She had heard every word. Her eyes that had understood all his pain and silence for the past 8 years, now shone with profound disappointment. That disappointment pierced Luke's chest, colder and more cruel than any blizzard. The group of horsemen departed, the sound of hooves fading into the night, leaving a thick, suffocating silence that enveloped the room. The silence of accomplices. The silence of guilt. Luke stood rooted to the spot, his hands clenched so tightly they bled. He bitterly realized that his years of trying to escape his wretchedness were meaningless. He was turning himself into the very scum he had always despised. The creaking of the floorboards shattered the deathly silence. Pike ambled out of the dark cellar, casually brushing the dust off his shoulders, a triumphant smirk on his face. His blood-stained hand slapped Luke's shoulder, trembling with humiliation. He leaned close, whispering in his brother's ear in a slimy, gleeful voice. "See, little brother? In the end, you're just as filthy as I am." The devastating sandstorm of the night had finally subsided, leaving behind a dim, gray, and bone-chillingly cold Nevada desert sky. Outside the stables, a thin layer of frost covered the cracked wooden fences. But the cold outside was nothing compared to the deathly atmosphere suffocating Luke's chest. His beastly older brother had no intention of quietly disappearing into the shadows. Pike ambled along the row of stables, his cold, greedy eyes scanning the restless, pawing animals. Then his gaze lifted, fixed on the upstairs window, where Luke's quiet woman lay. A chilling swish echoed. Pike's rusty razor blade pressed down, sliding along the leather reins of the gray mare. It was Bess's favorite horse. "I'll take the 3 strongest animals here," Pike growled, a sinister grin stretching across one corner of his mouth. "And I'll take your woman with me. A perfect hostage, a juicy human shield to keep me safe from those hounds at the border checkpoint." That statement was like a spark thrown into a fire. The cowardly resignation, the facade of false peace that Luke had painstakingly maintained, was instantly consumed by his most primal instinct for protection. He could sell his honor cheaply. He could kneel in humiliation before the sins of his bloodline. But Bess, she was his only light, the last boundary he would never allow anyone to cross. "Spare her, Pike," Luke roared, his voice hoarse, broken by pleading and despair. "I'll do whatever you want. Take all the horses, take all the food, but leave Bess behind." But beneath that pathetic facade of pleading, a cold transformation was taking place within the man's mind. From someone who always bowed his head in avoidance, Luke's eyes were now fixed on every movement of Pike. The muscles beneath his coarse cloth jacket tensed. His brain was frantically calculating every inch, every deadly step, to snatch the gun from his brother. Sensing his younger brother's burgeoning resistance, Pike abruptly stopped the knife. He drew his revolver, pointing the cold steel barrel directly at the mare's forehead. The screeching sound of the hammer striking the trigger shattered the silence of the desert dawn. "Prepare the carriage immediately, little brother," Pike hissed through clenched teeth, his rough fingers tightening on the trigger. "Either I'll put lead in this beast's skull, or I'll take that woman with me. You have 5 seconds to choose." The dark, silent space of the stable was suddenly torn apart by hurried, desperate footsteps. Luke rushed in, frantically grabbing the best saddle and thrusting it into Bess's hand. He hoarsely urged her to choose the fastest horse, to escape immediately before Pike changed his mind. He wore the label of protector to mask his final act of cowardice. He argued that his beastly brother out there only brought death, and that a woman like her deserved a more peaceful life than the mire of sin his bloodline was sowing. But the woman did not back down. She had never fled from any storm. Bess calmly let the saddle fall to the ground. Her hands, calloused from years of hard work, reached out and firmly grasped Luke's trembling hands on the stable door latch. She looked directly into his eyes, a gaze devoid of patience, but filled with an unshakable strength, piercing through the shell of self-doubt he had cowardly cultivated for 8 years. "Don't count the crimes of your own flesh and blood anymore, Luke," Her voice was calm, cutting through the desert night. "Count this instead." She didn't back down. She knew the dirty truth. She knew the man with the gun outside was a murderer. But she chose to hold his hand, chose to stay and stand by his side to protect this stable, the only place they called home. The moment the warmth and steadfastness of her hand transferred to him, all the uncertainty in Luke's mind shattered. The harsh truth struck him. His attempt to push her into the endless darkness of the desert was not a noble sacrifice. It was the ultimate cowardice of someone who dared not stand up and fight for the one he loved. He had crossed the line. The veil of resignation had been torn, and he could never turn back to being a silent, submissive man again. Luke's hand flipped over, gripping Bess's hand tightly. He stepped back, slamming the thick iron bolt shut, locking the stable door. The man's eyes lifted, his gaze sharp as a knife, fixed on the row of cold hunting rifles hanging on the wooden wall. "Prepare the rope," he growled, his deep, dangerous voice carrying the fury of a wild beast finally awakened. The narrow corridor leading from the stables to the storeroom was shrouded in darkness, broken only by the desert wind whistling through the cracks in the wooden planks, creating a mournful, desolate sound. Luke moved like a ghost. His cowardly hesitation had been left behind the stable walls. Now, only the coldness and sharp survival instinct of someone cornered remained in his chest. He knew his enemy all too well. He knew his ruthless older brother always kept a spare revolver hidden in the pocket of his coat, draped loosely over the back of a chair in the living room. The darkness concealed his decisive movements. A dry, chilling click echoed. Cold lead bullets slid one by one from the cylinder, lying motionless in Luke's hand. Each bullet removed was a decisive cut, exposing and completely severing the sinful bloodline he had once shouldered. That rough, metallic clang was the death knell for obedience. He turned, gently pushing Bess toward the hatch of the food storage cellar, his eyes pleading for her to hide there. The coming battle would be violent, bloody, and it wasn't a place for her. But once again, Bess pushed his hand away. Without a word of protest, she silently reached out and pulled the short-barreled pistol from under the kitchen counter. The cold click of a cocked gun echoed. She stepped back, standing firmly in the hidden corner of the hallway, forming a deadly cover. Two people who had silently concealed their emotions for 8 years now stood side by side, forged into an impenetrable unit. They didn't need to say another word, for death awaited them at the end of the hallway. Suddenly, the door hinges screeched hoarsely. The storage room door was kicked open, slamming violently against the wall. The beast had sensed the betrayal. Pike stood towering in the doorway, his massive shadow obscuring the dim light. His gun pointed menacingly into the darkness. "You intend to betray me just for a woman, little brother?" His hoarse voice, filled with mockery and murderous intent, officially ignited a bloody massacre. The dry, harsh clack of the hammer striking the empty chamber echoed chillingly. For the first time in his life, the sinister smile on Pike's face froze. He realized he had underestimated the despair of someone cornered. There was no flowery dialogue between the valiant Western gunmen, only the growls of wild beasts tearing at each other, knocking over everything along the narrow corridor and scattering it across the cold, dusty courtyard before the horse station. The battle was brutal, violent, steeped in mud and sweat. Pike was larger and more ruthless. He swung his rifle butt with a deafening crash. Then, a deafening explosion ripped through the morning mist. A flower of blood bloomed on Luke's shoulder. He collapsed onto the sand. The price for defending this home was not cheap. It was paid with his own flesh and blood, and the ultimate pain. Pike staggered to his feet, the smoking barrel of his rifle pointed directly at his younger brother, who lay convulsing in pain. The scythe of death was raised, ready to end the treacherous bloodline, but he had forgotten the woman standing in the shadows. A flash of lightning streaked across the corner of the porch. Bess's short-barreled gun spat fire. The bullet didn't kill, but it ripped through Pike's bicep, knocking the deadly weapon out of his hand. Just that one moment, draining his last ounce of strength from the depths of despair, Luke lunged, his blood-soaked body lunging at his brother, throwing him to the muddy ground. A sharp, metallic clang echoed. The old rusty handcuffs snapped shut, locking Pike's wrists, chaining the beast beneath the cruel desert sand. There was no hero here, only choked gasps, the acrid smell of gunpowder, and two men of the same blood lying amidst the ruins of their own making. But the battle was over, and the ground beneath them suddenly shook violently. The thunderous sound of galloping horses tore through the mist from beyond the mountain range. The sheriff wasn't stupid. He'd seen the cowardly lie in Luke's eyes last night. And the pack of hounds was coming. The wooden wheels of the prison cart clattered heavily on the cold sand, tearing through the gloomy morning mist of the desert. Pike was thrown into the wagon, his hands bound by rusty handcuffs. Before the barred iron door slammed shut, the beast managed to stretch his neck and spit a glob of mud and saliva directly onto his brother's boot. "You are a disgrace, Luke. You have betrayed your own blood." His curse, hoarse and venomous like snake venom, shattered in the silent space. But this time, Luke did not retreat, nor did he bow his head in humiliation. He stood tall on the wooden porch, his hand clutching his bleeding shoulder, his eyes calmly following the wagon until it was just a faint black dot. There was no triumphant anthem to celebrate the victor. In this harsh frontier, the price of truth always comes at a great cost. This stable would henceforth bear the stain of having harbored a murderer. His body was shattered, bearing the permanent scars of someone who had abandoned their own flesh and blood. But deep within his chest, for the first time in decades of his existence, his soul breathed the air of complete freedom. The invisible noose of the past had been broken by his own hands. From the shadows of the windy window, Bess slowly emerged. There were no tears, no flowery words of comfort, no choked sobs. She silently walked to his side, reached out, and pressed a clean piece of linen cloth firmly against the bleeding bullet wound. The warmth and strength from her calloused hand permeated his shoulder, firmly anchoring him to reality. They fell back into the familiar silence they had shared for the past 8 years. But this silence between them was no longer a wall of self-doubt or a barrier of sordid secrets. It was the silence of a survival pact, the understanding of two who had just faced death and decided to hold hands and move forward together. A harsh, dry desert wind swept across the veranda, tossing up clouds of dust, blowing away the dried, cracked bloodstains on the wooden floor, returning the land to its endless stillness. 20 years. Time in the Nevada desert is a cruel beast. It erodes cliffs, buries graves, and carves deep wrinkles around people's eyes. The veranda of the former wild horse station was now wider, sturdier, nailed together with strong oak planks, defying even the most furious sandstorms. Under the crimson sunset slowly engulfing the horizon, Luke sat thoughtfully in his old armchair. He gently rubbed his shoulder, where a long, jagged scar still ached whenever the cold wind blew. The scar was a permanent reminder of the day he had severed his own bloodline. In the distance, amidst the shimmering golden dust, a young man and woman were shouting and herding wild horses into their stable. Their children. New lives were being sown and raised on this land once cursed by crime. Luke squinted at the scene. He remembered the despicable man of 20 years ago, the one who measured his poverty by his tainted blood, by debts of revenge that could never be washed away. The creaking of the wooden door hinges echoed. Bess emerged from the kitchen. Time had woven silver threads into her hair, but her serene, unwavering demeanor, like a mountain, had never changed. She placed a cup of strong, unsweetened black coffee in his hand. The warmth spread. In the fading light of the day, the smooth gold wedding ring on her calloused finger gleamed faintly. She pulled a stool over and sat down beside him, her gaze fixed on the horses calmly making their way into the stable. "Count them," she said, her voice soft but piercing, just like that fateful night in the dark stable years ago. And Luke counted. He counted the wooden fences that had withstood 20 harsh winters. He counted the healthy animals. He counted the laughter of the children. And he counted the warm hand resting on his scarred arm. "True wealth doesn't lie in lineage," Luke murmured softly, his voice fading into the wind. "It lies in who you choose to stand with, to face the storm." Bess didn't reply. She only squeezed his hand gently. The desert night slowly descended, cold and silent. But on this windy veranda, the man who had almost lost his soul finally knew how to perform the most correct calculation of his life. Thank you for stopping by and joining us on this journey through the storm of this wild horse station. In the harsh frontier, the greatest wealth is sometimes finding companions willing to stay until the very end. If this story left you with a moment of reflection, please like and subscribe to the channel to continue the journey. See you in the next stories where the desert winds never stop blowing.